Well, we lost a few people, and we're about to lose two more. Jim and Joan have to take off, but it's been great having you both here. Really wonderful. But we have gained Gary from San Francisco. And Gary told me he has a question and might speak for an hour, but keep it brief.
From your book,
Yes.
it sharpened a really important point for me, which was some ambivalence I had, some hanging on to the notion that consciousness may be universal as opposed to just associated with my organism, right?
Yes.
And it really made me special to think that I was tuned into universal consciousness that made me different, better. It gave me something that I didn't have. And I really hung on to, and I like to argue. I'd like to sort of get into arguments with people that were strict materialists or, neuroscientists about that. And I was slowly losing my ability to justify any belief in universal consciousness. I mean, there was no foundation for it. It's just that all the gurus have always been talking about it, right?
Yes.
So that's something I've been hanging on to, and it's loosened up quite a bit. And it's created a lot of discomfort in me to not have that to hang on to. It might not be true. I may not have universal consciousness, may not be universal. There may not be consciousness after death. This may be it for me. And that's, it's pretty uncomfortable, but it's a real sharp point. So it was an area, was I debating with myself over it?
Yes.
No, I wasn't. I was still kind of stuck on the idea that.
So which book of mine have you read?
I read
10,000 Things?
10,000. I'm kind of halfway through the second one.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, it was coming upon these two books that opened your mind to not knowing.
It lined up. It lined up with where I was going with it.
Yeah.
And it made me face it a little bit more.
That's really
directly.
beautiful. Happy to hear that.
Yeah. So.
I think John Troy, my co-conspirator here, likes to say that this is just common sense. I mean, what we have that we know we have is human consciousness. We're at least like super intelligent gorillas and apes. We know that much. I mean, evolution is obvious, and here we are. So why isn't that good enough? I mean, it's beautiful to be human. It can be.
Question?
Pass the mic. Hi, Maggie.
Hi. I think I understand what this means, but I'd like to hear your, what more you want to say. Page 136, you're talking about talking about killing the Buddha. If you don't, blah blah blah, about killing the Buddha. There's a paragraph on that, and one of the last sentence in the paragraph says, "It is the ground of your own being that is to be seen." And I think I understand, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you mean by the ground of your being?
Okay.
What goes into that, please?
If I tried to describe the ground of my being, and you heard that and imagined that was the ground of your being, then you would not be killing the Buddha. That's what that means. I'm just trying to understand
what ground of being, not your ground of being, but what does that mean in general? What would go into that?
When you're asleep at night, you're not really aware of yourself, right? But when you open your eyes in the morning, you are aware of yourself. The world is there and you're there in it, so to speak. Or it's in you, is another way of looking at it, but in either case, all this is here, right? How do you deal with that? That's the ground of your being.
Okay.
Yes, rock bottom. How I deal with it, I don't care if I do have a headache. I've got to get up and get into the world. That's the ground of my being. The ground of my being I've been expressing for the last 7 days is, this is it. There is no improved future. This is it. be aware and deal with these moments one after another. Allow them to flow. Don't become attached. That's the ground of my being. But that doesn't mean that can be the ground of your, yes, okay. We all have to have the ground of our own being, because the ground has to sustain you. That's why it's called the ground of being. It's where it's rock bottom. That's another word for it. What's your rock bottom? See, my rock bottom is I know perfectly well that everything I care about is passing away and will be lost forever, including everything I've ever thought, felt, imagined, wrote, photographed. All that is just water over the dam, including my people I love, my friends, and eventually myself. That's the ground of my being. So since I know all that, I'm very attracted to being awake. As I was saying, when you're asleep, you don't know anything's going on, but when you wake in the morning. So this is kind of like that, but it's just on a different, slightly different plane. But I really don't want to sleep through this life. It's short enough. And I have found that even though there are some bitter pills to swallow along the way, if you're willing to swallow them, you get an awful lot of beautiful moments out of it. An awful lot. I get them every day. And the last chapter in the Depending on No Thing book is the myth of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus has to push a rock up the hill and he can never attain that relief or perfection of completing the task. Just before he gets it there, it rolls back down, and he has to then walk back down after it. And one of the points I was making in that analogy is that's really a lot what it is for me. I understand that there's nothing we can attain, and yet I have to keep living and keep pushing. And that can be really difficult at times. One is in pain or disappointed, or some project has gone wrong, or you lose your job, whatever it is, it can be really difficult. You have not gotten a boulder to the top of the hill, now it's rolled down again. The thing is that I've tried to point out, in those moments when you're walking down after it, that can be pretty nice. You're not having the heavy boulder to push, and until you get to the bottom, all you have to do is enjoy the walk. So if you're willing to push, even though it's senseless, possibly, meaningless, and has no positive outcome, if you're just willing to do that, then maybe the other part of the trip when you're walking downhill is kind of fun. No more boulder to push, at least for now, and it's all groovy. So that's the ground of Robert's being. He knows he knows he is going to die, and he knows that in every moment, and couldn't forget it if he tried. Doesn't need any reminding. It's self-reminding. Doesn't need any practice. The knowing is the practice. The knowing that this situation here is entirely impermanent, every bit of it. There's not the least little bit that you can claw back and grasp and say, I won this game. It doesn't work that way, I say. I say it doesn't work that way. Someone may disagree. I'll be in heaven with Jesus. I know a lot of people do believe that. And if they do, then that's the ground of their being. Right? That's the story.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about Jung and like the process of individuation that Jungians talk about and how that relates to your understanding of awakening.
Great question. The process of individuation, I just want to explain for those who don't know about Carl Jung. He imagined that living was a question of becoming more and more yourself. And he called that individuation, when you move out of the group mind and into the individual mind. Yes? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think awakening and individuation, or the flowering of old age, all that's the same thing. It might happen to you when you're younger if you're very lucky. I think I was lucky in that way. But sooner or later, in a natural way, this is going to happen. And some people only get it on the deathbed, and then there are the real wretched ones who don't even get it on the deathbed, and they're terrified when they die. That's very harsh. But most people toward the end kind of sink into the understanding, yes, this is impermanent. I gave it a run. Here's my disappointments over here. Here's the things that made it sweet for me, and pretty much accept that everything has to end, and I'm tired anyway. I've heard a lot from dying people, and this isn't so bad. Well, when you're not dying, I mean, we're all dying all the time, but when you're not in having to face up to this immediate end, and you're just like sitting here, I will never repeat this moment. Never. This isn't just something where different people could now take these positions and it would all be the same. No, it wouldn't. It's only because you're here that we're talking about Carl Jung. I know about him, but I wouldn't have brought it up. Yes? So Jung I both like and dislike. I like him because I think individuation's a great idea, and he had other good ideas. But I dislike him because he had a deeply religious streak, and he distorted certain questions. I quoted one in Depending on No Thing, where he said he could believe in God because why not? And that hadn't really been the question. He twisted the question so that he could give it a glib answer. I lose respect for that kind of reasoning. Not when an ordinary person has that reasoning, because it hasn't been trained to reason. But my God, this is like one of the most educated people on the planet at that time. And I've read his 21-volume collected works. I went to school at a Jungian academy for a while, so I do know the subject. And he was very iffy. Plenty of magical thinking mixed in with the good ideas, plus anti-Semitic, which never strikes me very nicely. And far too much love for Catholicism, Christianity. Not Catholicism, but Christianity. I don't like it. So it's hard for me to recommend Jung anymore, although I once did, you know. Mm-hmm. Let me just reiterate the individuation and awakening. What I feel is happening in me at this moment is a flower has opened, and the pollen is being scattered by the winds, and soon the flower will just, once the pollen is all scattered, then we know what happens to a flower. It just dries out, and maybe someone will put me in her hope chest or something. Dried out Robert, you know. But so this is that moment in my life, and that's why I'm taking all this quite not seriously but earnestly. I feel this is all very important, maybe for you, but for me it certainly is, because this is an unrepeatable moment, and it's not here forever. It's going to pass very quickly, very. So that is awake, and that is individuation, and that is an ordinary flowering of a human life that does not have to be striven for, because life is its own renunciation. If we just go with it, we're going to get wake-up calls. And so, see, I use the word awake, but that can be confusing, because a lot of people use the word awake to mean enlightened, and enlightened in that classical sense of you're one with God and you're a cut above everyone else because you're enlightened and the masses will never be enlightened. And I don't see it that way. I meet a lot of ordinary people whom I do consider are awake, and they wouldn't know anything about this conversation, never heard of Carl Jung, doesn't know about any Krishnamurti, never heard of it. But I see what they're doing, and it looks great. Okay, so that's my take on it, on individuation. What you're looking at is a highly individuated human, but also just human. Mm-hmm. Gee, that could be good.